everyone. Welcome to this is our second Tuesday chat. We just started the Tuesday chat, so I'm trying to get used to these. And you know who I am, I hope. I'm your Chief Librarian here, David, with AlexandriaRPG, and we're doing our, one of these days, well, we'll call it a bookshelf side chat, because he's got bookshelves behind him, and mine are over here, but they're empty because I'm taking everything out of the area. Cool, it looks like they can hear me. Sometimes I forget to hit audio when I do these things, and
that would be inconvenient.
Yeah, no. Well, the hilarious thing is because there's a delay in the chat. I'll be through complete intro and pass it off to the guest, who everybody can hear, and then they're like, "Oh, no audio." I'm like, "Oh." So, this is Jack from Gods and Gamemasters.
Yep, of Gods and Gamemasters.
Of Gods and Gamemasters. OGG.
Yep, OGG or OG&G.
So what would you like to tell us about yourself right off the bat?
Well, first of all, I have been running games for the last 40 years. I started back in 1982 when I convinced my dad to buy the Moldvay version of the D&D basic set because I went, Dad, we can all play Tolkien together. And
that's the pink box version. Pink box version.
Yeah, the reddish pink with the Errol Otis cover.
Yep. Because you had the Holmes version in 77, that was the blue box. Then the pink box in 81, and then 83, most people say 84, but it released in 83, the red box.
Yeah, the actual straight-up red box with the much more modern art.
Yes, it was Larry Elmore art, and then that was on the shelves all the way up into the 90s. That one stayed around for quite a while.
It did. And honestly, much preferred the art in the Moldvay book. I love Errol Otis, Willingham, D, that whole crowd.
I have a big soft spot for the art from that era. And somebody said it is a magenta color, but if you look up the ISBN number, it is the ISBN actually literally pulls up D&D box set pink box.
Interesting.
So yes, it is technically,
because I just looked at my book. I just looked at my book like yesterday, and it still looks red to me. That could be fading from who knows what. Anyway, I've had it a long time.
Yeah. 82 is when my brother and I bought our first book. We bought the Player's Handbook, and it kicks around in the library. So if you visit the library and you pick up a first edition Player's Handbook that has a Sears price tag for $10.57, that was my very first role-playing game book. We've got enough copies in now that one's going to get pulled out and brought back home and stay with me.
That makes sense. You don't want something that sentimental to get messed up.
Yeah, it's crazy that of all the things that I've kept over the years, that one has stayed in great shape, and for some reason or another has left the price tag on it.
I still have my basic set and my expert set, but I think my favorite book from that period that I still have is the original Deities and Demigods with Cthulhu and Elric in
and
it. The unallowed version. Yeah.
Yes. So the first one had all that. Then they released one acknowledging the different authors. Then they had one where they so like first printing was, hey, we're going to put all this stuff in the 144 page version, I think it is, and then or 172 page, I forget. Then the second printing still had all the stuff in there, but it had the acknowledgments to all the people that owned those works. And then third printing on, everything was pulled out.
Yeah. Yep. It's funny because nowadays they could totally do at least the Cthulhu stuff.
All the Cthulhu stuff, because his later works are still covered under copyright. So like the first few years of his stuff. So your major Cthulhu critters are available.
Yeah.
And we do have a first printing of that in the library. And people, some people are like, can I look at it? I was like, absolutely, go for it. And they were like, but
It's a library, guys.
Yeah.
It's not a museum.
Yes, the
I respect.
rarest first printing of Deities and Demigods had an orange blank page before the title page. That's the one that's really sought after. So it's like second printing's expensive, first printing expensive, first printing with the orange page is like bonkers because that's like
I'm gonna have to check and see if I'm gonna have to check and see which version I have. I know I have the first printing. I just don't know if I have the orange page.
Yeah. So yeah, because like the orange page was like first hand, like the first set of books out of the first print. So it was like first run of the first print.
Wow.
And there's
I don't think I have that, but
and when those pop up, they pop up for even more ridiculous. People are like, why is this more expensive? And then you find out, and you're like, oh, hey, we got ads, yay! Gotta love the ads on Twitch.
It's true.
Well, one of these days we might get a check cut to us from Twitch for all the stuff that we're doing.
I mean, that's obviously part of the hope in the long run for like my YouTube stuff.
Yeah. And this will be up on YouTube tomorrow.
Nice.
So we'll do this. Tonight I'll upload it to our Patreon, and then tomorrow it'll be available on our YouTube.
Awesome. Cool.
The other day we had an ad that ran. It was like 30-second ads. I was like, what? Yes, somebody said in the chat, says, touch the books, read them, please. I always love people like, are you sure? It's like, so obviously your first RPG was D&D.
Correct.
So been running games for 40 years. So what do you do with your 40 years of experience now?
Well, now that the middle of last year, I was driving a forklift for a living, which I'd been doing for quite some time. I've been in the military. I was a combat medic in the military. I was a nursing assistant. Then I worked for UPS. Then I worked for Southeastern Freight Lines. So mainly I've done hard physical labor my whole life. But finally I hurt my spine. I have permanent spinal damage because of the long term on the forklift. So I can't do that job anymore. And I finally look around and go, why don't I start doing this stuff that everyone's told me is that I'm good at all this time, that I have all this experience with, and try to make a living at it. And, share it with more people than I've been able to thus far.
Nice. Yeah, and that's actually one of the coolest things, because imagine trying to do what you're doing now in the 80s.
It would have been a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
I would have had to been in like Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, or one of those very tiny locations to even have a chance.
Exactly. Or been able to get the word out through magazines about a bulletin board system that you would have had people logging into.
Yeah, very different.
And mailing you checks or cash through the mail for your services.
Yeah, I don't think that would have worked out that well.
I remember somebody buying something from our store when I was a kid, and they mailed us like $200 in cash and what they wanted, and then we packaged it all up and mailed them back with a receipt and change. And I was like, just $200 cash through the mail. I was like, one, I could never fathom doing that. And $200 in the mid '80s was a boatload of money.
Yeah,
and I couldn't imagine mailing $5 through the mail nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Not if you can tell there's money in any way. Woo.
But if all the people that know me on Facebook, they know my frustrations with the post office. Post office currently has a 64-pound box of books that a bunch of companies donated to us in limbo.
They've just decided, hey, we're going to lose this, and not really worry about it.
Yeah, and every box that I've had lost through the post office has been frustration and nightmare. So tell us about Of Gods and Gamemasters.
All right, Of Gods and Gamemasters is just the name I use for the initiative, the company. I started out thinking that mainly I was just going to build adventures, and then on YouTube I was going to do a demonstration of how to build a world. One particular easy way. And while I am still doing that, I started realizing how much more content I could produce, and that I could produce this content both on my own and specifically to people's needs. Like somebody could come to me and say, well, this week I've got this big fight. I don't know exactly what I've got, but I want something special for the game. I want a special angel. That's a real example of somebody I've done for. I built a seraph for them, a six-winged angel to fight in Elysium, basically.
I want six-winged angels.
They are pretty neat. But because I have a wide experience of game systems, which you'll see if you look at the front page of my website, it's given me a lot of insight into how creatures are put together in various systems, how characters are put together in various systems. And because I've studied so much mythology and religion and history, I have a lot to draw from in terms of creating new creatures. Like I tossed, as a kind of a tribute to the soldiers of the Ukraine a few weeks ago, I posted a Ukrainian creature, the Mavka, which is sort of like a cross between a dryad and a rusalka, if you know what a rusalka is.
Not right offhand.
Rusalka is a Slavic spirit that is either fae or a ghost. It's hard to say, but it lives in a river. It's a young lady who lures young men into the river and drowns them. A Mavka is like that, but as a forest spirit.
So lures them into the woods and murders them.
Right. Lures them out of the encampment, the foolish young men out of the encampment into the woods, where they either get lost if she's just being tricksy, or where they get killed if she's being mean. Yeah, so I put up 5e, D&D 5e stats for that. I put out every week on my website, I put out a Pathfinder. Monday is a GURPS character or monster. Tuesday is Pathfinder. Wednesday is Mutants and Masterminds. Thursday is finally actually 5e. And then on Fridays, I put out a piece of content for Chronicles of Darkness, the New World of Darkness, like Vampire the Requiem or Changeling the Lost.
Nice.
I know more systems than that, but there's only so many days in the week.
Joe, trust me. Yeah, it's like the library's at over 6,000 books, hundreds of different systems, and I say I have played at least 60 different systems, and there's probably 4 or 5 that I know basically off the top of my head that I can run without any assistance or the books, and then I've probably run 50 or 60 different systems over the years, and I'm slowly learning more.
I recently had a request to build something for Palladium.
Yeah, I need to learn this. Yeah.
But why? But why? Is it useful for other nighttime soap operas of the period, or just Dallas?
It's very Dallas centric. It's got cards and stuff for. So you could probably, if you had the knowledge of the other 1980s evening soap operas, you could probably make stats for everything, because they're not deep. The depth of the system is ankle at best on a good day.
So I was just thinking of Dynasty,
Yes. I'm very tempted to see if I could do a charity run of Dallas at like Gen Con or something, and see how what the response would be.
I think I would only play if I got to personally shoot JR.
Well, this came out like a year or two before that storyline, so that's not
Yeah.
even. I don't even think it's in the book. I've only gone through it a little bit. I haven't gone deep into it. I mean, it's not a whole lot. Again, not all that deep of a game.
Right.
So it is cool that you're putting out stuff for many different systems, and I talk about all the time. GMs having access to tools and resources for to make them better GMs, or to help with the because, hey, I need a new monster that my players won't know right off the top of their heads, or I need maps or something for last minute game, or hey, I want to do something for honor the people of Ukraine. Let's do something there, and then you've put out monsters and stuff for that already.
Yeah. One of the things I would like to tell game masters who want to get better, especially new game masters, is the more games you play, the more types of games you play, the more systems you play, the better you're going to be at each one of them. Just specializing in one system means you get locked into that system's mindset and you don't see all the other potential ways of handling any given situation.
That is,
And the more you read of fiction and fantasy in general and sci-fi, also all those things, the more tools you have to bring to the table.
absolutely, because I mean, original D&D was born out of the love of Tolkien, and we got elves and orcs for a reason. We didn't
Tolkien, Paul Anderson,
Yeah,
because Three Hearts and Three Lions was a very big influence. Some of Conan is still in there. You can definitely see it, especially once you got to Unearthed Arcana, because that Unearthed Arcana barbarian is directly Conan. Very different than the modern barbarian.
yes, and I wish more people would read the old Conan stories so that they can see that our concept of a barbarian that we play now is not what Conan was.
No. The concept of what they call a barbarian now isn't even what I would consider a barbarian.
No,
It's a berserker.
yeah, and I think a lot of it was there was a big change after the Schwarzenegger Conan movie came out of how people perceived what a barbarian was.
Yeah, they became bigger, stronger, less agile. The whole thing, one of the big things about Conan was he was as agile as a panther. He's not the strongest guy in his stories.
No,
He gets he gets out muscled on a regular basis. He's big and strong,
Yeah.
but he gets out muscled regularly.
Exactly, but he's actually fairly smart, and he's incredibly agile for his size. Whereas
And cunning.
yes,
Yeah.
whereas the sword, I'll be honest, I absolutely love the Schwarzenegger Conan movies, but
It's a great film.
That's not Conan from the books and magazines.
No,
and
it is
novels.
not. Have you seen the Momoa version?
Yes, I think Jason Momoa is a much closer Conan, but so much else about that movie not so good.
I mean, you're not wrong about that. My point was Momoa made a much more appropriate Conan to the books. That was my only point.
And it was funny because so many people were like, "Well, he's not as big as Schwarzenegger." I was like, "No, he looks and acts a lot more like the book." So going back to your point, get out there and read more. If you read the original Conan, maybe you can play a barbarian a little closer to what barbarians used to be for us old hats who go, oh, yeah, barbarians devolved into this really one-trick pony, and they are more like a berserk from Scandinavian folklore.
Yeah, and they're not just that; they're also stereotyped as stupid.
Yes,
And just because a culture may be technologically less advanced than yours, that doesn't by no means means the people of that culture are stupid.
no, they may understand tactics, and they may be cunning. They may understand languages and nature better.
They understand all.
Yeah,
Correct.
but maybe you're running into a culture that doesn't understand magic. We've boiled a lot of because you read through especially some of the older D&D stuff, and even the older Tunnels and Troll stuff, and there's a hint to a lot deeper cultures and the like, because I mean, original orcs in original D&D were pig-faced humanoid creatures, not
Right.
what we've devolved into, what people complain about now.
Yeah, yeah. They were very different. There are good things and bad things about the way Warhammer and then Warcraft took orcs. There are both good things and bad things about it.
Yeah.
But a point I've tried to make to people about the foundation of orcs is that if you go back to Tolkien's own writing, he did not intend them to be anything based on a human subgroup. And in fact, referred to people in his own nation, in his own military force, as orcs on several occasions. I have a rant on my blog. I actually have a rant in defense of Professor Tolkien as the opposite of a racist. He has some unfortunate sights from his time, but for his time, he was remarkably progressive.
Yeah, and I love reading some of his works and stories outside of his writings outside of Lord of the Rings, which most people probably haven't. It was my slightly nerdier time when I read more, and now all I do is read RPG books.
I have all of his letter. I have the collected.
There's
Which
always,
one is that?
Let's see. This is the Gaia Complex. It's a new cyberpunk RPG.
From who?
His name's Shep, and
Cool.
Why can't I think? So this was released on his first expansion, just finished on Kickstarter. He actually worked on. Oh, we just had him on about a month ago. Big game, early 2000, late 90s, early 2000s. He worked on the second edition of it. It was made out of Scotland. Why can I not think of it all of a sudden? And then now he works for Modifius as his day job, and he does he makes this game at night.
A Scottish game in the early thousands.
Yeah, and why can't I think of it all of a sudden?
It's sort of ringing a bell, but I can't place it.
I am looking it up because it's gonna drive me bonkers.
Oh, absolutely.
Probably be easier if I just look him up.
Right?
Compelling video here, watching me Google something.
Well, considering what I've seen on streams in the past, it could be worse.
Slay Industries.
Okay.
SLA Industries. So Slay Industries. He worked. It was one of the first RPGs he played and got him into playing, and then he got hired on to work on it was one of the first big things he worked on. Is Slay Industries second edition.
Nice.
But Gaia Complex is cool. It uses D12s and D3s. Showed you this before we went live. Crazy old games sitting near me, new games sitting near me. Games. Let's see. This is the GM screen for Neon Lords of the Toxic Wasteland, made by
which is obviously based on the side-scrolling fighter games.
No, it's not. Take everything from the 80s and 90s, and like everything from the 80s and 90s.
Okay, so at least that and all the other things. Okay.
And then mold all that into Thundar the Barbarian.
That makes a lot of sense.
So it's a world thousands of years in the future, because the neon wars of the 1990s, the world collapsed, and thousands of years in the future, one of the main gods is the savage Lord Randy. Randy Macho Man Savage.
Yeah.
Then there's cosmic berserker, cosmic barbarians. They dual wield everything, but they also have they all carry around a fanny pack with cosmic dust in it. To go berserk, they have to snort cosmic dust. They're basically got a fanny pack with coke in it. They snort to go berserk.
Oh, that's...
He's got a synth skins, which are all robot clones of Ronald Reagan. Heathers,
Wow.
it's all female, like assassin group. Bicorns, they're semi-robotic humanoid horses with two horns. I love it because the game does not take itself seriously at any moment. So I'm going through that, going through Gaia Complex, going through G.I. Joe, and one other game right now. Can't think off the top of my head. Oh, the new Hellboy.
Yeah. The last Hellboy game I saw was the Powered by GURPS Hellboy.
So they just the one that went out on Kickstarter like 2 years ago, just got sent out. So we got our copy in because I backed it, and I love the Hellboy IP, and it's based on 5th Ed. So
as one expects in the current environment, many things are.
Well, that's one of the cool things with the current environment that I love talking to people about, is because you can put Hellboy out in with a 5e backbone to it, because you now have a great idea and you don't have to kill yourself building a system around it. You've got Powered by Apocalypse, Fate, 5e, Pathfinder. People make stuff off Pathfinder.
Yep.
D20 system, OSGR, and then D6 is the old Star Wars D6 is an open D6 system. So I mean, there's tons of stuff out there that you can make.
Having the open systems is actually really good.
Yeah,
I agree.
Because I think it's what brought RPGs back, because everybody in the 90s was trying to jump on board the success of TSR, and they didn't realize how bad TSR was. And then they had to make their own. Everybody thought they had to make their own system because nobody was willing to share or anything, and it all collapsed in the 90s. And then when D&D 3.0 came out, and they did the
open game license,
and then you just saw this massive explosion of RPGs, and you're like, oh my god, what do I do? And it was kind of nice, because for the longest time you just had to know one system and you could play anything with it. You're like, I want to play Wizard of Oz, I want to play this, I want to play this. It was all available. Most of it didn't fit into that D&D 3.0 system well, but it was magic, because the idea was now there for that really opened up, because there was only a little. There were third party companies making stuff for D&D through the years, but nobody was using it to really make their own game. They were just making things for D&D.
I think one of the worst mistakes Steve Jackson Games ever made, and continues to make, is being so very jealous of anything of theirs being used.
Because GURPS is a fun system, and before we went live, we were talking about how GURPS can be this, cranked to 12 set of insane rules, or it can be all the way down to, a 5 or 6 level of rules. And
absolutely,
I've seen them to see actually open up GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, it's for people to use.
Right. If it's generic and it's universal, which it can be, then if everyone has access to it, you'll see it actually start to be that. I have seen, I have their Discworld powered by GURPS. Mm-hmm. I have Innomine powered by GURPS. I have all these GURPS books, fantastic settings, well-researched, etc. But I can't produce commercial stuff for GURPS unless I'm working directly for Steve Jackson Games.
Yeah, that's one of the things that they put out the D20 Munchkin in the early 2000s, and I love it to death. apparently Steve Jackson hates those books because it's one of the few times that they stepped out and used somebody else's license for something.
Right.
And oh my god, I love D20 Munchkin so much. Making characters is fun.
It's hilarious. It's hilarious. Why wouldn't you?
I mean, they made a plutonium dragon that gets weaker as it gets older. I love it. So hilarious. And I have used it in games like signs like "Beware, Ancient Dragon," and then they finally, you're like, "We're level 1. What are you doing? Why would you put us here?" And then they finally get the gumption, go back to their hometown to go fight the dragon. It's this tiny little dragon that's like, oh, it's dead.
It did all its rampaging years ago.
Exactly. It's long since.
Yeah. No, the revitalization of the RPG industry definitely started with the OGL, and then again the revitalization of it under Hasbro due to the enormous popularity of things like CR, things like Critical Role.
Yeah.
I myself I've only seen a few episodes. They were good. It was just a lot of time watching somebody else play.
They're all professional voice actors, so they're always going to be better than what we're going to produce.
Maybe. I'm pretty
production
good.
Quality.
Oh, definitely that.
Maybe not the random stupidity of the Adventures of Stinky Pete fighting vampires in a ghost rock, an abandoned ghost rock mine. That's what we're doing on Wednesdays typically. In fact,
I'm about to say that sounds pretty fun.
It is pretty silly. And for everybody watching, there will be no Deadlands tomorrow because we're prepping for all the events. So tomorrow I have a crazy day, and then Thursday we'll be taking the library to 2 different locations set up for events. So we decided to call it for this week on Deadlands. We'll be back the following week for Deadlands because I do need sleep sometime. I think.
I mean, but do you though? You've just become used to it. You're getting weak. If you just give up on it entirely, you can regain your strength.
You haven't seen me during events. I go like 8 a.m. to midnight, like every day during events. I gotta prep for that.
I get you.
Tomorrow is a day full of meetings and medical stuff, so I'm just probably gonna be like,
that's gonna be draining. I totally understand that.
Have you ever just tried, not sleep? You've been to events with me, Lackey. You know that I go days with barely any sleep, or sometimes no sleep. One of the library members poking at me. What's your favorite system?
My favorite system. Okay. First of all, this is a difficult question because I play so many and I love them all. Many for different reasons.
Okay.
But GURPS is what it comes down to. Because it's so flexible, because it's the only system I've ever seen that lets you play as realistic as you want or as cinematic as you want with just basically turning a couple of dials and flipping a couple of switches. It is the most accurate representation I've ever seen of real combat. And as someone who was been a martial artist my whole life and then was in the military, having a fight vaguely resemble fights as they can actually happen is helpful for me. 6-second rounds in which I can only shoot my crossbow once or my bow once. That's not a real thing.
Or a machine gun.
Right. Whereas people think the 1 second rounds of GURPS are strange, but fights are over fast.
Yeah.
Unless you spend a lot of time dancing around.
Which, if you want to do that, there's a way to do that in GURPS.
Correct. They very specifically have the rules for that. Well, like one of the things I was like, I'm not even the best shooter I know by a long shot. I'm not even in the top 20 of the people who shoot that I know. And I could put 7 rounds downrange in the black one-handed in about a second and a half.
Nice.
So games where you can only shoot your pistol once over 6 seconds, or God forbid, a minute, if that's how your round was, like it was in the old days, they just drive me insane.
Let's get to some of the, because GURPS is one of my favorites. Probably, I'd probably put it in my top 5 of favorite of all time.
It's definitely there for me. But one of the important things to remember is not even GURPS is great for every game.
No,
I don't like GURPS for superheroes. It works well for vigilantes.
Yes, and
but
I will 100% agree with that one.
Yeah, it works well for Batman or Green Arrow or those guys. It does not work well for actual superpowers.
Yes. So you could do a superhero game based upon our current world, i.e. no superpowers. Just somebody that is well trained, and then you'd probably play, what is it, ninjas and super spies?
If you were doing Palladium, yeah.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I got all of them mixed up. Palladium is one of my top 10.
You'd be using the martial arts. You'd be using the martial arts handbook. Honestly, all you need is mystery, martial arts, and maybe cops. But I've actually run a short 750 point vigilante game set in Detroit.
And that's actually one of the coolest things with GURPS is being its generic, generic-esque, seeing as how it's only Steve Jackson games. But there's so much stuff made for it over the years that you want to play a World War II campaign with werewolves and vampires and superheroes and giant robots. You can grab the books and put that together.
Yeah, you absolutely can. One of the things that, I've enjoyed Palladium games I've been in over the years. The system itself is kind of wonky, from my perspective. But the settings that Palladium has come up with are absolutely choice.
The settings and worlds are great. And I tell most people, the one of the biggest problems with Palladium for most people, why they end up with kind of an odd view of it, is the layout of the rules. When you meet Kevin, they make sense. When you compare them to most every other RPG, the layout of the rules don't make a whole lot of sense. So it's really easy to go like some of this doesn't make sense. And then if you've read through it enough, you've played enough, you're like, oh, this makes I get this, but it's not laid out in the traditional sense of most RPGs.
Right. And then you do have the problems in Rifts, for instance, of there being no possible comparison between the various character classes.
Yes. Well, and that's
I'm playing an outlaw scientist, and I'm a street rat. Well, I'm a glitter boy. I'm a dragon.
Yeah. So where you can go crazy in GURPS, and make this insane world. If you try that in Rifts, you end up breaking the system because Rifts is Palladium in general. You really have to keep focused on what you're doing. So one of my favorite campaigns I ever ran in Palladium, we started out in Rifts. So those that are watching, you have SDC and MDC. So standard damage and mega damage. 1 mega damage is like 100 standard damage. A human has 50 to 60 standard damage that they can absorb. And a bullet does 30. Whereas mega damage, 1 mega damage would just murder a human in armor outright.
And the smallest laser pistol does 1d4.
Yeah.
Mega damage.
Exactly. So we started out all SDC. They caught up to the bad guy. He ends up teleporting him somehow to the past. So whatever ammo they have on him is the ammo they have on him. And a couple of them develop magic. Some of them get magic weapons. And then they catch up the bad guy. He teleports them, and they get it going into the Heroes Unlimited universe. And some of them still have magic. Some still have magic items. And they start to develop superpowers. then they catch up, and they go into the Aliens Unlimited, and they mutate into aliens, but they still have their superpowers and magic. And then after all that, we go back to the Rifts world, where they now are MDC creatures with laser vision and all this, and they can take on a glitter boy with no problem. So it got them back to their original world without having to deal with.
There are definitely ways to make it work. Like when they first introduced MDC way back in Robotech, it was fantastic because it fit the setting so well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I actually got a request on Twitter just 2 days ago to produce some Palladium content.
Oh,
so
nice.
I'm gonna have to do some reviewing and see what I can do to build. They were looking specifically for TMNT and After the Bomb stuff.
So yeah, officially you can't do any TMNT stuff because they no longer have it. But it became the After the Bomb,
right?
Which is funny because if you're scanning ISBN books, ISBN codes for a library, say, and you scan the TMNT After the Bomb book, they recycled that ISBN into the After the Bomb core rulebook, and they're not the same whatsoever.
No, they're not.
Let's get to some of these questions here. So,
alrighty.
How did you come to focus on world building and setting creations as a primary focus? So we kind of covered that a little bit, but
it's the part of game mastering that I love the most, is creating a self-sustaining cycle, an internally consistent perspective of a world. Once I've gotten a world built, the more clearly a world gets built, the more extensively it is, it's so much easier to improv anything set in that world. Okay. The deeper it is, the more real it feels to the players. Yeah, and I fell in love with Tolkien and his world building at such a young age that I basically emulate him partially, at least in terms of scope and depth, not necessarily the exact styles.
Because I love how mostly consistent he was, because he changed things over the years. But I mean, for the most part, he was very consistent within his world building. And it goes back to we were talking about this with somebody else, I think last week, is sitting down and putting together a document of hey, this character should be like this. This character has these traits. Magic works like this, so that if other people are working on something, they don't get out of they don't step out of a line. Make Magneto have new superpowers. Magneto can manipulate the magnetic fields. He doesn't have laser vision.
Right.
So that's something cool, because you're building out things to help people with cool worlds and helping them make new, consistent, fun adventures.
Right, because one of the things I bring up in my very first video is that for me, I start from the macro image and then I bring it down. I start with if it's a fantasy setting, I start with the pantheon, with the gods. Because if you know who the gods are, then you know what they make. You know what they will make. Once you know what they make, you know how the world will progress based on the combination of what the gods allow and human and inhuman natures. It's just the confluence of mythology and history at that point. World building is pretty easy when approached from that point of view.
I mean, you don't want to end up with Greek mythology that has no real consistency within its own self.
Well, I mean, one thing to understand about that is that what we think of as Greek mythology is Athenian mythology plus Spartan mythology plus Corinthian mythology plus, and if you know what each of
because Greece was not a nation; it was a group of city-states, and they all had their own little bits and pieces.
They did. And the first of. As an example, the first arrival of Aphrodite in Greece was as Aphrodite Area, and she was a war goddess in Sparta.
Yes. and it's because Athena would change. Here she is in Athens, and as you move away from Athens, she changes into little different. And then it's funny because now we're studying all this and we're trying to lump it into textbooks for people to learn. Be like, hey, this was Greek mythology. Well, this is a whole lot of different mythologies that we've lumped into Greek mythology.
Correct. And that's the case with most ancient mythologies as I've come to study them. What we understand as Norse mythology is Icelandic mythology as kept by a Christian.
Yes, that is more of it has come out of Iceland and then it's funny because the majority that we do study ends up coming out of Iceland, but then there'll be bits and pieces that have come out of Denmark and out of Sweden, out of Norway, that all have their own little differences as well.
They do.
That
very much
we are
do.
now lumping in and trying to change the Icelandic Norse mythology.
Yeah, no. The thing to understand is different peoples, even when they're close together, have different needs from their gods.
Yes. Because hey, if you're in a fishing village, you're gonna be a lot more dependent upon gods of the water and stuff. 10 miles down the road, that is based on farming and wheat. You don't care about that fishing god, and then you get a town that's closer up into the mountains that's doing mining and smelting. You know what? They don't care about your wheat goddess. They want the blacksmith god.
Right. And while they may have all the other gods because they know of them and they're part of, kind of a loose conglomeration that others might call a nation, they worship what matters to them there.
Yes. And they may even address or recognize, like, okay, yeah, there's this wheat goddess. She's a lesser god. But the other place, the god of smelting is the lesser god.
Right, because it's not nearly as important. If you're going to spend all your day plowing and sowing wheat, then the wheat goddess is your,
Exactly. I was an anthropology and history nerd in college. Let's see. How do you decide what game system or rule set will work best for the world that you want to create?
That is actually a really good question. And it's something I analyze as I'm going. In some cases, I start with, okay, I need a world for X system. So sometimes I start there. But sometimes as I'm working on the world, as I discover how its worldview is and how its magic system works, I then look for the system that matches it or that can be cobbled to match it the easiest. Like, if I were to create a fantasy world where all magic is done by combining certain metallic objects, like Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, where they take these metal salts or whatever and get their powers.
Mm-hmm.
I would not use D&D for that because the magics they're doing don't match anything that D&D does.
Yeah, you would have to recreate the magic system, which
right
is not what not what your goal is about.
Right, not generally. Whereas with GURPS, the pieces are there. Okay, well, what abilities does eating that metal give you? Well, here's the abilities right there in the GURPS book. And we just give the modifier must take this, last this long, and all that's in the GURPS book. So for simulating most fiction, if I'm actually trying to build a game to simulate fiction, it's probably going to be GURPS because the pieces are there. If I'm going to create a superhero world that is X-Men or Teen Titans or more powerful, then I'm going to go Mutants and Masterminds because that's what is best suited for it. If I'm going to... Honestly, D&D and Pathfinder are only if you specifically want D&D and Pathfinder. Even if you build different worlds for them, they are fundamentally the same game. They serve the same purpose. They have the same basic structure to them. They're the same genre, I guess, which is specifically dungeon fantasy. And even GURPS Dungeon Fantasy doesn't really fall into that same genre the way Pathfinder and D&D do. But the sacred cows and old leftover bits of D&D that we have lend it toward only really simulating D&D. Not that that's wrong. I love D&D. I play D&D a lot. But when it comes to building new and interesting worlds that aren't for D&D inherently, they're mostly going to come out of different systems. I'm currently world building and building a system called The Hidden Folk, which is for urban fantasy, and I'm having to build it from the ground up because my view of the standard urban fantasy tropes and dark fantasy tropes like vampires, werewolves, etc. is far more mythological and folkloric than the modern post-Anne Rice Gothic perspective. For instance, just as an example, in my setting The Hidden Folk, vampires don't burn in sunlight. They also don't glitter, though. The reason they don't burn in sunlight is because the first reference to vampires burning in sunlight ever appeared in the movie Nosferatu in the 1920s.
Yes. Because it's not even brought up in Bram Stoker's Dracula.
No, he walks in the daylight in that book.
Yes.
Yeah, he just doesn't have all of his powers.
Have you checked out the game Vaesen from Free League?
I have not. I have seen references to it a couple of times. It looks pretty good. It's the Nordic folklore specifically, right?
Yes, and they just did a Kickstarter for the British and Irish Isles. So can't wait for that one to get here. Free League just, I don't think they've made a bad product. Their design and layout crew are just second to none. Their actual development of books is great, and their rules and everything are stupendous. But if you're looking for a game to kind of look at for more folklore based setting, Vaesen's a great place to start if you want some tips and hints and the like, because it's just a really good
I always like to absorb
point.
everything in the space, basically, so that I know how other people have done it. I really like the Fate version of the Dresden Files, for instance.
Yeah, that was actually really good. I thought, because when I first saw it, I was like, how are they going to do this? And it's one of the things I've liked from Fate, and I haven't really played a much other Fate, just because I think most of the settings or things that are people are porting to Fate, I think have been done better elsewhere. Fate's a good core system to work from, and they're good, simple, fast games for the most part. But it was great for Dresden Files. Really, really good.
Absolutely.
For Dresden Files.
I love the way they ported the magic system, and it feels very authentic.
Yes.
But one of my design goals for Hidden Folk, and one of the reasons it's going to have its own system, is I want it to be equally usable with the same system, same character sheet from tabletop to LARP.
Okay.
When I was running the first Requiem game down here in Jacksonville, I know it was the first one in this city. It might have been the first one that was done, because we started running Requiem out of the tabletop book before the LARP book came out, using leaked information from the Camarilla on how the card draws worked.
Okay.
And we basically, after the LARP rules came out, we looked at them and went, Well, these are dumb. Tossed them to the side and kept the tabletop. And just kept the card draw system to go with the tabletop rules.
Oh, pardon me.
Bless you. And also Gesundheit.
I think I have another one. I don't know. Okay, I don't think I have another one.
But that showed me that there could be a lot more correspondence between a tabletop and a LARP system, but that the numbers are actually so different between how it works in LARP and how it works in tabletop that you get a different feel. In tabletop, you're rolling tabletop Vampire the Requiem, Chronicles of Darkness. You're rolling like 10 dice. And anything that is an 8, 9, or 10 is a success. And anything that is a 10, you roll again and keep rolling as long as you get 10s, right? In the LARP, you draw a card between 1 and 10. Add your stat and skill mod, and if it's over a certain amount, you get a success. And then every 3 points, you get more successes. But that contracts that weird belt, that contracts the bell curve you get from multiple dice down to a single direct 1 to 10 line. And it changes the likelihood of things happening by a lot.
Yeah, we did so when before we started talking about when I did we converted live action rules for D6 Star Wars, and it was funny because what we did was each player when you needed to make a roll, you did basically an opposed roll versus whoever your storyteller was at the time, and it was however many fingers because it was based on a D6 system. And then we had a whole system set up, and I wish I had written them down, because when I explained them, I'm like, they don't make a whole lot of sense. Like, I got to sit down and figure them out again, because they worked really well. But we also had, 64 players. So we had to do something to make things go quick.
Yeah, it's the same reason the cards came up. And the cards were a huge advancement over the old vampire and werewolf system, which was rock, paper, scissors.
Yes,
which people cheat at.
We had started with cards, and the cards just people kept forgetting to bring cards. So, and we had to make new cards on 3x5 cards every freaking week, and doing that over and over again. And you're like, okay, you're handing them out to players, like, okay, give them back.
Just forget this.
Yeah, so we just converted it to basically you could throw a 1 to 5 on your hand. But it was verse whatever the GM threw to figure out whether you got a 1 or a 1 through 6, and it actually worked out a whole lot of fun and was quick because I'd played Vampire back in the day, and the rock paper scissors was just so bad, so bad. Now, that was something I'd put out of my mind.
Now, one
years.
big thing is if everybody at the game has a phone nowadays, the dice systems can be more complicated.
Yeah.
I haven't, I have to think about that in terms of my design as well.
But I'm really, it takes people, if you're trying to create something where people can LARP, you want to try to not take them out of whatever they're doing.
Right.
So pulling out a phone to roll dice is one more thing to take them out of their moment.
Right. Whereas having a narrator or storyteller there with cards already out doesn't change anything.
Yeah, it's much quicker. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why I'm looking at probably a 2x10 system, especially since it'll give me a bell curve. And bell curves are important.
Yes.
Rather than that linear progression is just, it's too random.
My headphones are wrapped around my seat. How did I do this?
Yeah, mine said low battery a minute ago, which is weird because they're plugged in, but apparently they're still going, so.
Holy cow.
Hold on a moment. My headphones are literally just twirled around my seat, and I was.
Your chair decided your headphones were spaghetti.
Sorry, everyone. I kept catching my head, and it was getting kind of annoying. Yeah, there we go. I think I'm back. It was hilarious because a little tiny USB cable had caught in a loop in the in the headphone cable, and then every time I moved or turned my chair, the cord was getting shorter.
Nice.
I was like, "What the heck is going on?" Felt like somebody was playing a prank on me. Yes,
They were. It was you.
Yeah, exactly. The world will never know. Yes, Yakety Sack is the Benny Hill music, if I recall correctly. Somebody said we needed the Yakety Sack music.
Yep.
Let's see. Get to another question, and I like this one. So we kind of went all over the place in that last one, but for good reasons. So, what is the most successful way to get a new RPG player who insists on playing 5e derivatives to try a new game system?
That's a good one. I think that your best bet is to find a game system that has an IP that they're already familiar with and like. For instance, if this new player insists on playing 5e, find out if they like Dune. Do they like Dune? Try the Mephidius Dune or one of the other older Dune systems. If they're really fans of Terry Pratchett's Discworld, pull out GURPS Discworld and go, hey, we can play that right now. If they're fans of DC Comics, pull out Mutants and Masterminds.
Especially the DC books.
Yep, because they specifically have all that done. You can go, dude, for the first few games, you can literally play Superman. You can make your own character later. You can literally play Supes or Bats or whoever.
And that's actually something we do within the library, because we run across people all the time like, oh, I've played, but I didn't really like D&D, or, we find out they had a bad game session, and I try to find out why they had a bad game session. Did you not like the game? Did you not like your GM? Did you not like your group? Those are usually your three arenas. And
there's so many reasons for that.
Yes, because I'm working on a panel for I'm not the GM for you. Because I'm not the GM for everybody, and you're not the player for everybody, and that's not the game for you. So we try to find,
and that's not even a matter of skill. That's a matter of just compatibility. Some people are fantastic game masters who I don't want to run with.
Exactly, and and I try to get GMs, because I run across GMs all the time that are butthurt because somebody didn't like how they GM. I was like, well, maybe you don't need to change how you GM. You just need to find a different group to play with. Or maybe you need to, change how you GM a little bit. Learn a little more. Grow. Look at some other systems. Read some other books, like you were saying earlier.
Always be open to improving your skill set.
Yes.
That's on you as a GM. But it doesn't mean that you as a player have to judge that GM if they don't match your preferences. You just go find somebody who does.
Yes. And in the 80s and 90s, that was near impossible. Nowadays,
right?
It's
Absolutely
much easier, especially with virtual tabletops.
Yep.
I know a few people that they don't like playing on virtual tabletops, but I tell them try them out, because maybe that can lead them to a face-to-face game. Because some people might just they might be trolling around looking for groups on a virtual tabletop, and then you find a group of people that you want to actually play with, and then you're like, hey, let's do this in person now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I've met a couple older gamers my age or a little older, like, I refuse to use a virtual tabletop. I'm like, okay. I ran
on Roll20 a few times at the height of the pandemic, the worst parts of it, because we couldn't even get our regular group together for obvious reasons.
Yeah, during the pandemic, Roll20 went from 5 million to 10 million accounts.
Yeah, but we discovered that Saturday night on Roll20 at 9 o'clock was just a bad time.
because everyone is using those servers.
Correct.
They have, I know, in the last few months, they've increased the amount of hardware they have running their systems.
Oh yeah, no.
So,
I was impressed with the work they. Yeah, we would have to. I was impressed with the work they were doing. Don't get me wrong. I understand what happened. No one was expecting that.
Exactly. Nobody's, people are like, oh, I've used Skype. Oh, Skype couldn't handle it. Then we started doing Zoom, and then everybody's trying to figure out, like, what do we do? Like, anybody can get in my Zoom call. Yeah, everybody's like...
Well, what we ended up doing, we had Roll20 for the table stuff, but Discord for talking.
And a lot of people have done that, especially when they were having issues. Because early on, playing around with Roll20, I had a ton of issues. Oh, yeah, look, commercial. 2 15-second ones. It's not bad. Oh, hey, Jack Daniels. I can go with that. I always like to see what the commercials are.
See, if we get a commercial that matches our interests. I like Gentleman Jack for Jack Daniels, by the way.
I had said something about tax day in the stream, in the news stream yesterday. And it was funny because everybody ended up with tax ads.
Nice.
And we're back. So let's see. So you're kind of on a very similar page that we are in the library of trying to get people. I say we work as RPG sommeliers, and they're like, hey, have you? Did you get TurboTax and Jack in the Box again? My wife got TurboTax and Jack in the Box yesterday, and she just got them again. I got Jack Daniels. They don't think I drink enough. But anyways, we jokingly say we work as RPG sommeliers because we'll get somebody that is interested in playing, but not sure where they want to go. So it's like, what's your favorite movie?
You help
what's
them
your
find
book?
Absolutely. You help them find the system and setting that most matches what they want to experience.
Yes.
Because everybody who comes to role-playing games is looking to experience a book or a movie. They're looking to experience a fantasy it's a fantasy even if it's science fiction, but they're looking to experience this other world. So you want to give them the closest experience to that as you can for their first game.
Yes. And if you can if you can put a book into somebody's hands, you talk to them, you're like, oh, I really love Firefly. And you're like, oh, great. There's been 2 Firefly based RPGs. And they're like, really? And they just like look at you confused. And then you put it in your hands. And they're like, oh my God, I have to go find this. And now they want to. And
they're both actually well written. So I don't feel bad about recommending them.
Yeah,
there have been some IPs out there that I could not bring myself to recommend a game.
Yeah,
because the game was so bad.
I don't know how many times pulling out the Buffy and Angel RPGs has gotten just random people like, oh, I don't know if I really want to play. And then I'm like, what's your favorite movie or TV show or book? And somebody's like, Buffy, but like they ever made that RPG. They just like lean over, like, here you go. Here's 4 books for it. And they're like, oh my God. Oh, and here's Angel. And they're like, I don't know what to do. Like.
And that gets you in, and at that point they're into the Unisystem.
Yeah, and
you
could play Army of Darkness from there.
Yep, there's a lot of games you can play in Unisystem.
Yes, and it's one of the great things. Like you get somebody, you find the thing that's going to make them excited. It's like when a guitarist talking to new kids playing, and it's like, what guitar should I get? Go into the guitar store, look around, and find the guitar that you want. It doesn't have to sound good. It doesn't have to be expensive. Find you find a flying V that has flaming skulls on it. I used to have one, and that's the guitar you want. Find a way to get that because you're going to want to pick it up. You're going to want to play it, and that's going to make you better. And if you can put the right system into somebody's hands, and even though the system may not even be the right one, the setting may be the setting they want, and they'll be excited and just start playing, and they'll find a group. They'll browbeat their friends and be like, we're going to play Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You're gonna learn this game.
Yep, absolutely. And once people understand that there's so many games out there for so many intellectual properties, then they start to understand that there are games out there for the intellectual properties that haven't been officially represented, and that there's a game out there that can represent that idea they had in their head since they were a kid.
Yeah, we had somebody on a while back. It's on my desktop. It is. Somebody did an amazing Legend of Zelda. Zelda Reclaim the Wild. And if you look it up, I mean, it is actually a better put together RPG than many RPGs that are for sale. The people that put that together over the years have done a stellar job. So I have pointed people to that direction. We're like, hey, there's a big bold community out there for it. You know, check it out. It's a wonderful game, and you know, you get somebody who may not be into RPGs but loves Zelda, and then all of a sudden, oh, hey, there's an RPG for that, and then they start reading through and like, oh, hey, I want to play.
And then once you've played an RPG, several RPGs, several sessions of one RPG, a lot of the time, then you're going to be more open to trying a new one. Don't get me wrong. Again, as people pointed out, there are a lot of people who just want to play D&D because it's, I don't know, it's their lifestyle, it's their brand. I don't know what it is. And again, I love D&D. I love 5e. I loved 3.5. I don't talk about 4e.
4e was not a bad game. It was a bad D&D.
Thank you. That is exactly the truth. It was a great game. It was not Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. You read through the rules, you're like, wow, these are actually really well built rules. They were just trying something new that did not fit the, you know, at the time, 35 years of D&D, and people were like,
right.
And it didn't help that they were like, hey, here's 4e. Oh, and we're working on D&D next already. You're like, what?
And for my group, we tried 4e for about 6 months. We had all the books. We really tried 4e. But we had this problem with the swinginess of the D20. Every single time we came up against the big bad, we would use our daily power, and it would fail.
Oh.
So nobody's daily power ever worked except the fighter because it was reliable. So your big boom fails, and you're down to hitting him with a basic attack. You know, which was not fun.
That actually kind of sucks a lot.
Yeah, that's the point where we're like, we can't do this anymore. We tried. There were some great ideas in that time, and it just
as a D&D, my frustration with it was I have sat down with players like, okay, here you go, and I've got pre-gens for everybody. Everybody's like, cool, I'm going to play a rogue. I'm going to play a rogue. And it's like, all 5 people sitting at the table find out they're going to play rogues. I'm like, we're playing a rogue-based game. They're like, what? And you couldn't really do that in 4E because it was so built on building out a party.
Roles, because the parties required every role to succeed. That is one of the things I like about 5E, even more away from 4E, even more than 3.5. In 3.5, you had to have a certain balance.
Oh, I disagree. I ran lots of barbarian-based campaigns and stuff.
Certainly not as much as 4E, and you could run games. You could run games focused on one thing. 5E makes running games focused on one thing easier, I think.
Okay, I will give you that. Because 4E you basically just couldn't do it. 3 and 3.5 you could. 5E does make it easier. I will give you that.
Right. Yeah. It's a simple, slick system, and I can see why a lot of people like it.
Yeah, and I always tell people I have a love-hate with it. I love that it's as big and it gets people introduced into things, but there are things that I hate just because it is the big 500-pound gorilla in the room. But I also love that the system kind of breaks at a level 10, so you get a lot of people going, hey, I like role-playing, but we've played a couple games to level 10, and the game gets wonky after that. What else is out there?
Which is funny because with my 5e content, most of what I focus on is actually 10 to 20.
Yeah, it's because the stock stuff for beyond 10 is not good.
Right. And I produce a lot of stuff at higher levels, and people are like, wow, that's cool. I'm like, yeah, the tools are there for you to build cool things for tier 3 and tier 4, but Wizards isn't doing it, and the stock stuff isn't there.
Yes. And exactly, and the upside to that is it brings people to guys like you that are making that additional content, or it brings them over to other systems that don't necessarily have those issues, or
right.
I've played fantasy for a little while. I would like to play space. What do we?
Right.
Because I love sci-fi. And then or they go, oh god, there's steampunk stuff. I love steampunk.
Right.
The steampunk people always look around and like, want to make sure nobody's looking when they say they love steampunk.
Which is sad because there's nothing wrong with it.
No, I think somebody's going to overhear.
It's just what happens when Goths. It's just what happens when Goths discover Brown.
Yeah, that's what it does. Oh, I like that. What's the coolest, most memorable way that the recipient of one of your worlds or settings took it and broke it in half?
Oh, wow. Okay. This is way back when, actually, and it's not something that I've done recently. I created my setting for a LARP. It was called Three Houses. It was for Vampire the Requiem, and the idea was that three major houses of what's called the Invictus, which are a covenant of high-class rulers in vampire kind in Vampire the Requiem. Three different houses were vying for the position of Prince of the City. And
Okay.
because they were equally powerful, none of them ever was able to be in charge. So they kind of accepted a temporary truce/ceasefire. Temporary, it's lasted for 300 years. And the Carthian movement was kind of administrating the city center and handling the peace talks, which continued to be ongoing. I handed this off to another storyteller, and they immediately decided that the Carthians were actually in charge, and that the werewolves and the changelings were now all part of the treaty as well. Which would be fine if the setting had been balanced for that at all. But it was not. So all the people who had created the characters based on what they knew of the setting that was written were involved with one of the three houses and the conflict between them. And then a whole bunch of people came in with characters that didn't fit that setting at all, and it just went all over the place.
Nice.
So.
I always love it when stuff gets broken. And as for the vampire stuff, so Modifius was putting it all out. And now it's as of November, a year or two ago, Renegade Games, and apparently they're going to be making a big announcement at Gen Con this year about Vampire.
Is it Masquerade still? Because I don't think I've seen Requiem in a while.
No, well, Requiem was supposed to be the follow-up to it in the early 2000s, and that only got like 2 releases. And then Masquerade 5th edition came out in 2018 when I was at Gen Con,
right,
which was published by Modifius, if I remember right. But now it's in Renegade Games' hands, who just put out G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Power Rangers, and they just got the My Little Pony from Hasbro.
Wow,
that's gonna be Vampire and My Little Pony, same publisher.
Does Onyx Path still exist?
They do. Their big game is Pugmire. Love Pugmire. Love Pugmire.
Yeah, Onyx Path is the one that was handling all of the Requiem stuff for the longest time.
Okay, so apparently in the chat, Onyx Path is making the Requiem stuff.
They still are? Okay.
Yeah, because I know 2018 was when the 5th edition of Vampire Vampire, but it was Vampire the Masquerade came out.
Right. Yeah. I was really sad when basically, from my perspective, everything dropped back to Masquerade. I understand a lot of other people preferred it, but I liked Requiem because it had less meta plot and the backstory was more flexible. It allowed the storyteller to decide what had happened in his game.
And they should have released them kind of as instead of a replacement, because I remember when the early 2000s when Requiem came out and it made a lot of vampire players angry. Should have been like, hey, we're releasing this for the not diehards, basically, because it was all the diehard vampire fans that were like, oh, you're ruining the world, and I get why.
Well, they had literally ended the world. They had a whole storyline about the end of that world. I know, I ran it.
Yes.
I ended the last world, the last LARP before mine. I literally ended his LARP with the physical end of the world.
Yes, and I
had them meet God, had them meet an angel and Cain and Set, who turned out to be Satan, and Abel, all in the same scene.
Yeah. But I think everybody wanted a continuation of that world, and the Requiem was not designed. The how it was set up was not designed for the hardcore vampire fans, which is why I think they didn't really keep it going because they haven't focused on it as hard as trying to bring back all the other stuff. I know Onyx Path is still making it, but when did Onyx Path start making that? Let's see if I can look it up. Where is Onyx Path? Someone's going to tell me in the...
Somebody will tell you in the chat before we pick it up.
Oh, Greg Stolks. There's a name that... Let's see... No, I'm saying Requiem was a more loose world that people could play in versus a tightly controlled world in history that so many of the fans had become addicted to, for lack of a better term.
Invested in, I think, is probably the better way to put it.
I don't know. In the '90s, I would say addicted because I tried to play Vampire with friends in the '90s, and I'm like, I am just not. You don't need to wear your fangs and trench coat to school, Tommy. My name is Lestat. I'm like, no, your name is not. Nope, you're Tommy.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. There was a substantial amount of that, but my problem with it wasn't so much just the history, because having a firm history wasn't the worst thing, but I liked having more control of it than that. It was that as they put out new books, new plot things would happen, and you were expected to keep up with them. Your world had better include this new piece of plot.
Oh yes, and that was actually one of the things that turned me off of it, because I did have friends that were so deep into it, and I was like, hey, I'm looking at doing this and this. Oh well, that's not doable anymore because that plot line's finished. And you're like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Look. And I get the attraction of it. I really do, because and something that I had talked to friends that were really into it back in the day. Like, why are you so into this? And it's like, oh, they felt as this part of this much bigger thing. Like the people that are playing in New York, they're playing along the same plot lines and everything that we're playing with here. In tiny little town here, and the people in Texas are playing the same thing in Washington, and we're all playing the same story. We're just our own little piece of that story. I'm like, and I really get that. Like, I do, and I understand why.
I do, and I can see how that would be appealing to a player. But you know how frustrating that is to try to do as a storyteller?
Yes.
To be told, no, you can't do that. You can't do that thing that you came up with for your story in your world, because your world is our world.
Yeah. And
which is why my group never joined any of the organizations.
Lackey points out Shadowrun also guilty of insisting people buy new rule books to keep up to date with the advancing plight lines. Every company that's put out Shadowruns, and it's kind of one of the things I've thought's neat with Shadowrun is it is a continuing story, but I've also found that the players are less likely to be invested in the storyline the same way that the Vampire the Masquerade players were.
Right.
And I run across some old heads now that are still very invested in that world, and they're part of different paid groups and stuff. They pay fees to be part of them, and it's kind of funny because with that paid fee, they show up to every event because they're invested each month paying a just like their WoW subscription.
Yep.
It is a way to do community building. Yes, it is. And it was never for me, but I do understand the unique idea of going, hey, I'm playing here in Washington, playing the same storyline that somebody in Texas, somebody in New York, somebody in Michigan, somebody in France, somebody in Ukraine is playing. Well, the people in Ukraine probably aren't playing right now.
Yeah, I get that appeal, I guess, but for me, LARP, even when I had 160 people, it was definitely about community building, and becoming a tight group of people. But I enjoyed the freedom to make the story about whatever we as a troop decided to make the story about, instead of being beholden to somebody in DC or Chicago.
Yeah, and I get that because there is some cool there is cool aspects to each of it, and if you find somebody that wants that, then you can direct them towards it. Somebody says, Eric says, it's the foundation of things like D&D's Ventures League. Not only are you in the same world setting, but in the same major plots, but you have to run the exact same adventures. And like, it took me a little while to grasp the concept of a Ventures League, and it just one day at an event, I was like, oh, you guys are just playing a toned-down version of Vampire. And somebody's like, we're not doing that. That's LARPing. And I was like, okay. Okay.
They're doing the interactive and collective thing the same way.
Yes.
Definitely. But that actually goes back to the shared experience of the tournament modules in the old days.
I love
and the way the
those
published modules from Wizards of the Coast nowadays are a shared community touchstone. People talk about, in my version of Curse of Strahd, this happened. In my version of the Storm Giant, Storm King's Thunder, this happened. They are commonalities that people have, which throughout 3.5 you didn't really have. 3.0 and 3.5 there was so much product out there that people weren't playing the same things.
Correct. I remember when Eberron came out. I was just super stoked because it was the first new setting for D&D in ages, and I got people to play, and I was excited because people finally wanted to play a D&D setting that I wanted to play, because through the 90s I wanted to play Dragonlance and no one wanted to play Dragonlance. So I played lots of Ravenloft and lots of Forgotten Realms, and never got. I still to this day actually have not played a game of Dragonlance. I need to remedy that. I so need to remedy that.
Yep. On Twitter, talk to Yodano. I'm sure he can hook you up with some Dragonlance peeps.
Yeah, it's reading through all the Dragonlance stuff. It's been always my favorite setting for D&D, and Eberron was my second favorite just because allowed us to play the I forget what the heck they're called, but the
Changelings, Kalashtar, Shifters, or Warforged. I love Warforged.
Yeah,
I used Warforged
coming out in that first Eberron book was like, I can play as a construct. I've wanted to do. I had cobbled together rules off and on for years for playing stuff like Warforged, and it was never good. But I was a teenager.
I really was happy when Eberron came out. I was less happy than you, probably, simply because I had an entry in that setting search. Because at the time when they put out Eberron, they had just opened up to everybody, hey, send us your pitch for a new D&D setting.
Nice.
And I had a pitch in at the time. I was glad to see Eberron when it came out because it was fresh and new, and it certainly deserved to be picked up far more than my very basic approach.
Yeah, it was definitely a step out of the norm for D&D at the time. I mean, playing the Warforged, you get to play constructs. That was such a big shift. You're like, okay, I'm playing.
Finally, a world where they took into account the realistic ramifications of that much magic.
Yeah, because all the other worlds were, for the most, were the same. Just you had either more magic or less magic, and you had different storylines.
But they were still pretty much medieval fantasy.
Yeah.
Or not really medieval, Renaissance fantasy, because of course you're almost up to guns in most places even before they introduce them.
You're in that mix of medieval and Renaissance.
Right.
Romanticized medieval would probably be the better way.
Yeah, romantic high medieval is probably a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And all of them were variations on that take, which I've always thought was really interesting because, of course, the first setting that all that comes out of is Tolkien, which is almost Iron Age. The heaviest armor in Tolkien's books is chainmail. Mm-hmm. The latest period of time they could possibly have been in the real world would have been like the 1100s before they started introducing plate.
Yes, because I'm trying to think, because in the movies you see types of banded mail.
And you see plate armor on the elves and on all these things, but they didn't have any of those things in the books.
Yeah, that's actually really. I hadn't really thought about the time frame with that he was trying to go for with that. I as a history nerd, I always just I loved going over the allegories of the World War One.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Technologically speaking, he was looking at somewhere between the 800s and the 1100s, and it was even a fall down from the ancient period Numenor, just like it would have been a fall down from ancient Rome.
Yeah,
because they didn't have the banded mail or the heavy breastplates.
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. I mean, a really good because it's something I hadn't really thought of, and it shows that everybody can pick up a piece of literature and take something entirely different out of it,
it helps that I read every book, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, and The Lord of the Rings at least once a year from age 8 to age 28.
I definitely didn't do that.
So I was a little obsessed. Just saying.
I read The Hobbit in the first grade, which everyone thought was very weird, and then read Lord of the Rings. I think 5th grade, just because I was so frustrated with the dwarves in The Hobbit. I still to this day do not like dwarves because of how bad I think the dwarves are in Lord of the Rings in the book. So I've always had this just dislike of dwarves through fantasy literature because of the impression reading Lord of the Rings and how just bumbling the dwarves there were. But if you read through, they're kind of all rejects. The only reason they're on that mission is because none of the other dwarves think it's.
Oh, you mean in The Hobbit, especially?
Yeah. And then you go and you read Lord of the Rings and you're like, wow, Gimli's actually pretty badass.
Well, that's the thing is that between those two books, Tolkien actually realized that while he had based some of the ideas of the dwarvish people on, like their language and such, on the Hebrew people, he realized that in telling this story to his son, because of course The Hobbit started out as a bedtime story, he had inadvertently painted the dwarves in a negative light, and it had been taken as him saying bad things about the Jews, and is one of the reasons that the Germans contacted him about a translation of The Lord of the Rings. His letter in response to them is brilliant, however. He tells them all.
Yes. And if
he tells them all. And but that's one of the reasons he changed the depiction of the dwarves so strongly for Lord of the Rings, is he realized he had made a mistake.
Yes. Well, and looking back at The Hobbit, literally the dwarves out of there, they're not the cream of the crop. He was telling a story of yeah. You had one guy that's like, hey, I've got a mission, and he was trying to recruit dwarves to go with him, and basically the only dwarves that would go with him were the dwarves that everyone else was like, yeah, you go with him. Like, this is a fool's errand.
The other ones, Thorin, Balin, Dwalin, to a lesser extent, Philly and Killy, because they're Thorin's nephews. All the rest of them, yes, are absolute bumbling oafs.
Yes. And
Biffer, Bopper, Bomber, they're all peasants.
Yeah. And they were the reason why for years I've had such a strong of dwarves, because it was my first experience of dwarves in fantasy literature.
Right. Well, dwarves as we understand them in fantasy literature come straight out of Tolkien.
Yes.
Dwarves in Norse myth aren't as nice.
No.
They are extremely greedy. They are extremely selfish. They are not necessarily violent, but they're not necessarily friendly.
Yes.
They are more like D&D's Duergar, which isn't really surprising considering the Norse word is Dvargar. So
it is funny. Neither are elves. Elves in different mythologies, very different than elves from.
Yes, from Tolkien, absolutely. Tolkien's elves are more like earthbound angels in most ways.
Yes, because all the wizards were basically higher angels. Sauron
Wizards are the Maiar and actual high angels. And so was Sauron. So was the Balrog.
Yep. Yeah, the Balrogs were all freaking the angels that followed Lucifer, basically.
Morgoth.
Yeah. And as of the same power as Gandalf and the other wizards.
Yeah.
But there were more of them on Earth.
Right. Sauron originally wasn't any more powerful than another Maiar. He had just learned how to concentrate his power into mechanical things because he was of the kindred of Eule, the smith god Valar, who's the one who created the dwarves.
Yes. Now we're getting into more deep topics. Let's see.
Sure.
You saw in the email about a player character confessional. Do you happen to have one?
No.
Oh, you don't have a
confessional.
So the player character confessional, but you maybe want to do a DM confessional, but I love the player character confessional. So tell us the game setting, about the character. So like D&D 3.5. His name was Joseph. And he was a half dwarf, half drow bard, and then in character, tell us about one time that character. Oh, there I was. I had the key that would open the place the vault that we were trying to get to, and I just I kind of kept it in my pocket because we needed to gather more resources before we got there. So about 6 months later, I magically find the key and let everybody know. Something like that.
It's the confessional is some
The
bullshit
character,
you pulled on the rest of your party at some
yes,
point.
or there I was, overseeing, my character's name's Steven. It was in D20 Modern, and I was up in the control tower, and looking at the cameras and saw my entire party getting slaughtered. I had the access code to all the funds in the Swiss bank account, and I could have just pressed a button and opened the door behind my teammates, but they were trapped, and I left.
Wow. Yeah, no.
Someone gave that confession a couple years ago.
All right, so during an evil game I wasn't running some time past, this was late 3.5, we had gone all the way from first level to 20th level. We were getting into the epic levels back when that was a thing. I was playing a gold elf half devil necromancer. And I had given up my wings. I'm a half devil, so I'm born with bat-like wings, and I cut them off as sacrifice to gain better necromantic power. My middle sister our mother was a very strange gold elf. My middle sister was half celestial. Still evil. My youngest sister was half demon. While our mom was a gold elf. As it turned out later, we found out our mom had been possessed by an ancient spirit far worse than anything without a name from outside time and space the whole time, which explained a lot. But yeah, by the end of it, I ended up sacrificing my own youngest sister to my diabolic patron in order to gain the power to become a full-on Duke of Hell. Then we destroyed the whole planet as a sacrifice to our mom. We did some bad things.
It sounds like an entire book of stories, confessions. Yeah.
Like the first thing we did was kill our paladin, quote unquote paladin, our anti-paladin's older brother was like 9th level. We were starting at, we had made it to 3rd level by this point. But he went out hunting with us one day, and I thought to myself, you know what? His older brother's just a human. He can't see in the dark. So we put darkness on a couple of arrows, shot them at him, and since we were all fiend-blooded, we could see in darkness spells. So he's flailing around blind while we murder him. It was... yeah. Set the tone for that whole game.
I always love when people play evil campaigns, because you get to go a different direction, and you let people kind of run wild for a moment, and then you bring them back to a normal game. Same could be said for playing a Munchkin game.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many varieties of games we can play out there. We should never feel constrained to any one game type, game style, game tone. If you can't play a silly game sometimes, then the horror games don't have as much impact. And even in a horror game, if you don't occasionally have a little bit of silliness, the horror will start to just nobody will want to play anymore.
Yeah, it'll either grate on the players, or you get bored with the setting. Be like, okay, I just don't want to play anymore. I'm not escaping. I love palate cleanser games. So stuff like Teenagers from Outer Space, things that are great little.
I have that on my shelf. I have Teenagers from Outer Space on my shelf over here, along with Toon.
Yep, both stellar games, and they're great palate cleansers. Hey, we've just played through a long campaign, and everybody's stressed out. How about we play, Toon or Teenagers from Outer Space this week, and then next
or
week
the
you start
equivalent,
exactly
Illuminati University.
Illuminati University is a blast. We've got a copy of it in the library as well. It is a fun, silly game. Occasionally, you need those to, or if you've been playing something like Neon Lords, where it doesn't take itself seriously, but you can play a long campaign of that, and then you're like, okay, we play something else, and then get into another system for a little while. Having this palate cleansers.
You get tired of having nothing but comedy.
Yes.
You can get tired of nothing but gonzo. Sometimes you want something based and grounded.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we've been playing this. Let's go to a cyberpunk system. Let's go to fantasy. Let's go to sci-fi.
Right.
There's a setting. There's a setting out there for everything, and I try to get people, thinking about what is around so that they can not burn themselves out playing.
Right. I agree with that totally.
Let's see. Is there anything you'd like to talk about before we wrap this up? So what's the best way to contact you?
Best way to contact me is to check out my website.
Okay.
Of godsandgamemasters.com. All one word, just a big O at the beginning. Doesn't really have to be a big O at the beginning. It's not case sensitive. But of godsandgamemasters.com, all my contact information is there. I've got a contact page, got a services page, got a blog. I have a separate area that used to be part of my blog. Now it's just called TTRPG content. That's where I put up all my new characters and monsters. The blog has things like my new optional rule set for 5e spellcasting that allows spellcasting when you're out of slots. Explains what preparation really is from a different perspective. I also have an article about the ecology of dragons, which is very different than most people think. My version is. It's specifically an alternative ecology of dragons. And I have an alternative ecology of Dragonborn as well, because somebody asked a few days after the alternative ecology of dragons came out.
Nice.
But yeah, all my contact information is up there. I'm also at Jack Gogsbane on Twitter, right out there in the open where people can see me.
So, what is the strangest book you have on the shelf behind you?
Oh, God. It may not be a game book. So I have my Chinese myths and folk tales. I have my black copy of the Lord of the Rings. Strangest book.
Okay, we'll narrow it down. What's your strangest or most unique RPG you have back there?
Oh. Most unique RPG. Man, that's still pretty hard. I would actually have to say, so far, the most unique RPG I've seen is a new one. And that's this.
Hey, Coyote and Crow. We've got a copy for the library. We were talking to the creator, and really, one thing I love about that is I've said it a few times recently, is we really like when people take mythology and have a lot of fun with it. And he took mythology that hasn't been used much in gaming. And one of my favorites is still Norse mythology, but it's been used to death in gaming the last 20 years. The Greek and Roman not so much as of late, but the creator's going to be the guest star honor at NorwestCon. Cool. But then we don't get a whole lot outside of Norse with the last 20 years. So seeing this, I was stoked just because it's taking some cool mythology and putting it into an RPG, and he didn't put it into an RPG in a boring way. He did it in this really cool, fascinating, cyberpunkish way. So
almost all of the people who worked on it, certainly the leaders on it, are all indigenous people.
Yeah.
And that's impressive to see. I'm glad to see it. It's not necessarily requisite from my perspective, but I'm happy for it.
Yeah. Well, and it was cool. Like his little disclaimer at the beginning, like, hey, I want people to play it, because I kind of talked to him a little bit when we were at Gamma, and I said, were you afraid of people going, look at it and go, well, it's not my thing. He goes, kind of. He goes, that's why I put the disclaimer in there. He goes, I want people to play it and learn about, the culture and history and stuff. And I was like, okay, I really respected his little disclaimer, because some people throw disclaimers in their books, I think, just because they feel like they have to. But if you read through his little disclaimer at the beginning, it's like, I want you to play this, but please be respectful, kind of thing. And it's written in a way of, please come experience this, not hey, you're not one of my people, go away. It's like, please come share this. Somebody said you want more Slavic, and there's not been much in the way of Slavic based RPGs or anything.
Well, I'm producing Slavic content right now.
Awesome.
My Ukrainian, like I pointed out,
Yeah.
I had the 5e Ukrainian guy or creature. My most recent monster for GURPS that I just put up is actually a Polish Lipierkna. Anyway, I can't really pronounce it.
I spent a year in Ukraine. I gave up on trying to pronounce Polish and Ukrainian words. Nope.
Right.
Yeah.
At any rate, he's the Lord of the Mountain, and he looks like like a Gandalf type figure. And as long as you're polite to him, and I mean really polite, because you can make a bad step, he'll help you get out of the mountains safely. But if you're rude or you make him mad accidentally, he turns into a giant deer-headed, fanged monstrosity and summons the storm down on you and eats you.
Now we need to get some more Middle Eastern and Indian as well. I think those are the next two that I'm going to try to convince people to do. And I'd like some more Japanese, because most people end up focusing on the same couple eras of Japanese folklore. I'm like, there's so much more cool stuff in Japanese folklore that nobody really ever touches on.
And there's so much stuff that isn't quite so tainted with the Orientalist brush. Like the Western worldview of Japan.
Yeah, well, that's and everybody ends up with that. There's just a couple periods that everybody ends up going over and over and over, and it's cool stuff. But I'm like, hey, there's another 1,500 or to 2,000 years worth of cool stuff before that you guys are totally forgetting. Korea would be another country that has some really fascinating mythology.
It absolutely does. I recommend. I recommend a YouTuber by the name of Legal Kimchi for his stuff on. He does really good work on many aspects of D&D, but he also talks about Korean history and mythology sometimes.
Nice.
He talks about power and law in Dungeons and Dragons and all those things, and it's really because he's also a lawyer, which is why the name. Yeah. But he's really good. Really,
I just started thinking about illegal kimchi, and I've probably eaten a lot of that. Things that have done horrible things to my body. And I know some Korean game designers up here. I am going to make some phone calls and be like, hey, why are you not making a Korean folklore based RPG? And like shake them. And they don't do RPGs, so I'll have to teach them how to make RPGs first.
Good idea.
So it's been awesome having you on. Love to talk to you again some more in the future. But it's
anytime.
It's an eye-opening experience on cultural perspectives. Check out the Asians Represent podcast, who does close readings of Asian-influenced RPG books that were written by Westerners. Well, it's just there's so much. There's so many that have been written by Westerners because it's something that it's people have been fascinated with, especially since the 70s. So
you've got things as bad as the original Oriental Adventures, and things as good as the most recent Rokugan, and they're still tainted with the Orientalist brush, the Western perspective.
Yeah, and I would love to, because I'm big history nerd, so I did studying on tons of cultures across the world, and there's so many cool, fascinating. I mean, all the different parts of India. You could make so many really bizarre
absolutely.
RPGs with the different pieces.
But I would want the leader on that project, at the very least, the leader on that project to be South Asian.
I don't know anybody that's that would be up for really diving into it, because that is a I guess we all think of India as one country, but man, it's not one country.
Oh, no.
India's
No, it is
India.
not.
It's like going back to the Greek mythology. We lump,
Absolutely.
and Greece is this big, India's this big.
Yeah.
Lumping
Second
all of
most
Greece
populous.
together.
Yeah. India's the second most populous country on the planet.
Yeah, when I was studying,
Well,
I was
anyway,
like,
it flipped back and forth.
yeah, I was like, I'm going to dive into Indian mythology. I was like, oh, blew my brain away. I was not ready for the world I got
They have
into.
more gods in a 50-mile radius than other whole cultures have in their whole history.
Yes, and some of it's very fascinating, and a lot of it hasn't been shared.
Very true.
So, again, great talking to you. Look forward to seeing you again soon. So I need to hop off. I got a meeting here shortly. So,
All right.
you have fun. And it's like it's 11 o'clock at night there.
Yeah,
In the Florida world.
it is in the Florida world, which is not a real place, but I have to live here anyway.
You have a good night.
You too. Good night.
And